Now, I've mentioned the major pentatonic. The Mixolydian is the other quite frightening one. If you want to look up in a scale book, it'll tell you what exactly the Mixolydian is, and it's one of the modes. There are various modes. It's a complicated thing which I won't go into now, but essentially you can bring the Mixolydian scale back into being very similar to the common or garden major scale, which is this scale. The Mixolydian scale changes one note from that, and it changes it from this note, or to this note. So instead of, you get that already sounds quite bluesy, doesn't it? The other one sounds like a happy, jolly Julie Andrews kind of scale, which of course it is. But this one makes it sound more sleazy. It's sexy. It's a seventh. It gives it that sound. So that's very bluesy sound. That's a seventh. That's a seventh, or a dominant. Somebody a bit more schooled than I am might call it. Hence, you might hear the dominant blues, which is using seventh chords. So A7, D7, E7 dominant. That's why it's called that. With those notes that you've got, we've got some notes from the major pentatonic, we've got notes from the minor pentatonic, we've got the blues scale, we've got the Mixolydian scale. Again, if you look at what my hands are doing, write that down on a guitar fingerboard diagram and see where they are, so you can actually then lift it back off and do it yourself. It might be easier to do that than actually to copy my fingers. That gives you an awful lot more ammunition. Now, if you add string bending to that, I've spoken before about bending from the minor pentatonic. You haven't got many strings you can bend that actually make much musical sense. You've got that one to there. There's not many. Once you've added these notes, for instance, you've got lots more. So you can start bending between those. So you can get things like you've got this situation. You're bending that note to that note. Chris Rea uses that kind of bend a lot. Hear that in a lot of his songs. That's lovely because you're combining in that little run I played there. Semitone bend. Nice vibrato on the top. Notice that I didn't put vibrato on the first one, but I did on the second one because it adds expression to it. Not on the first. On the second. It's a nice, expressive little run that you can learn it, and it's really, really sweet. Again, got this one as well. So you're bending. It's really nice to be able to do that. So by adding these fairly small things to your repertoire, you suddenly get to a point very quickly where if you get this stuff under your fingers, you can become a very expressive guitar player. The permutations with just the few notes that we've spoken about are really endless, and every guitar player under the sun, Santana, you couldn't get Santana without those three notes. As I've said, Chris Rea. Eric Clapton would often use that. Again, you can practice. Lift it up, bend it to the point where you think it is, play it, check it to see if you're right. Bit sharp there. Bit sharp again. Flat. Close. You can sit and do that in front of the television for hours, and you really will hone up your bending accuracy. Of course, add some vibrato to it, you give yourself a bit of a cop-out. You haven't got to be quite so accurate because your notes are rising and lowering around the target note. So it's a good thing to add, a good thing to learn, because it does get you out of all kinds of accuracy problems. But you need to do it properly, otherwise that in itself will sound pretty bad. So the other note that the Mixolydian scale has given us, by default also, or almost, is the note which I consider possibly the most important note to make yourself sound really strong as a blues guitar player. When you're playing a major blues, or as I mentioned before, a dominant blues, which is using those chords, sounds very bluesy, doesn't it? That's a seventh blues or a dominant blues. Now, you'll notice in that chord is that finger there. That's playing that note there, which is the major third. It's the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's the third note in the do re mi scale, the major scale. And if you're playing in a major, or as I say, a dominant blues, let's call it major blues, it's easier. It's a great note to use. For instance, when you're starting a solo or starting the intro to the song, perhaps you get a situation where the drummer will count you in like a 1, 2, 3, and it's down to you to introduce the song before everybody comes in. The drummer might go 1, 2, 3. You could go. That note there is so strong. That note lets the audience know you're in a major key, which we are, A major, A7, A major, the same deal. Lets them know you know that, and it lets them know that you're confident that you know that. It lets them know that you know the right note to be playing over that chord. It gives out a lot of information about you as a player. So let's do that again. Let's do another intro using that same note. You notice also I did a thing where I actually used that note, the minor third, that's from the minor pentatonic scale, and that, the major third, from the Mixolydian, together. It's a very commonly used thing in blues. That's a grace note or a passing note. It's only there to lead to the important note. So I start on that note, which is the root note of the chord. A. So I start A. You would have heard that a million times. Eric Clapton, B.B. King, all the famous blues guitarists will have used that exact lick to start a solo. And you can use that too. The great thing about blues, probably more than any other form of music, jazz is very similar, is that the repertoire, if you like, the lick bags of all the great guitarists who've gone before you, and they might be Stevie Ray Vaughan, Albert King, Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, B.B. King, Albert King, Freddie King, Albert Collins, Buddy Guy, right the way back through even people like Chuck Berry, back to perhaps the father of blues, who's T-Bone Walker. I should actually quickly mention T-Bone, because T-Bone sort of invented, he's a guy from the 30s, 40s, 50s, very, very famous blues guitarist. He sort of came up with the shapes that we use today. It was really he and one or two others who formulated those shapes. And you'll hear his playing in B.B. King, Chuck Berry. I mean, T-Bone Walker invented that thing. Chuck Berry. That was a T-Bone Walker thing. That Chuck Berry intro, I'm digressing slightly, but I say it because the Chuck Berry intro is very similar to this blues one I just showed you. Or Eric Clapton would probably do that. The difference between one guitarist and another. Gary Moore would probably do that. Clapton would probably do that. So, but Chuck Berry took that same thing of T-Bone Walker's and went... It's all part of the same family. But like I say, that major note is very important, and the reason it's important is it allows you to target the chord tones within the chord. The chord tones are... That's the root, the A of A. We're in A, so that's A, that's A, that's A. That's the root, that's the third, that's the fifth. Those are all strong chord tones. They're called chord tones because they are notes that come straight out of the chord. The chord is made up of those notes. Those three notes played together. So if you target those notes within your solo, for instance, you start to sound like, again, you're in command, you know what's coming next. The great thing about blues is, going back to our simple three-chord trick, as it's known, like that, you know when that next chord is coming. If I do it again, you know in your head that I'm going to change to that chord before I do. Listen. Here it comes. You know it's coming, so what does that give you? That gives you the ammunition to think, okay, I'm going to prepare a run that's going to land on a tasty note in that chord. And you can do this, you can prepare it, you can think, the run's going to start here, it's going to go through those notes, but I'll end there. Now, I've showed you that chord there, but let's show it there, same chord. Or let's take the seventh off it, let's make it a normal D chord. Instead of making it, we'll make it that. That's just a straight D major chord. If you were to know that that chord was coming at a certain time, so here it comes, and back down again, stays on there for a bit. You know it's coming again, don't you? And here it comes. It stays up there for a bit. Back down again. You know it's going to go to the E, don't you? You know it's going down. And back down to the... So those chords are very predictable. Once you know blues, you know that those chords are going to come. Everybody does. There are different ways of playing them, and again, that's something that we can go into another time. But because the chord changes are very predictable, it allows you to change your... to select a note for when that chord does change. So, for instance... just take those two chords. I could go... the second chord. I've targeted that note in the second chord. That's actually the D in the chord of D. So I've gone for one of the strongest notes in D, which is in fact D, to target it. So I knew it was coming, you knew it was coming, the audience would have known it was coming had they been listening, and so you've underlined the fact that you know what you're playing, you know what the chords are, you know what notes you can use in the chords, and you sound like you're a guitar player who knows what he or she is doing, which is very, very important. It's a confidence thing. The audience wants to be confident in what you're doing, and you do too. So learning these things will help. You can target any of the major chord tones, any of the principal chord tones, I should say, within the chords, and it's you can learn those. For instance, in D, we've got, there's the D, there's the fifth, the A, another D, we've got the, so you can target. You can choose which way you do it. Very often people get confused when they say, oh, you can use this scale over this chord. You haven't got to play the whole scale. You can play one note from the scale, as I did just then. So when the second chord comes up, you can play that. I'm targeting that note. So we've got minor pentatonic, major pentatonic, Mixolydian, blue note, flat 5. Add those all up, it gives you an awful lot of notes that you can choose from. I'm going to play a slow major blues for you now to show some of the things we've spoken about put into practice, the scales, the note choices, the bending, the vibrato, targeting chord tones, things like question and answer phrasing, so that you're actually creating what seems like a composition on the spot, rather than just a sequence of not particularly interesting notes. This blues is actually in G, just to show you that what we've spoken about in A applies equally in every other key. So I'm going to be starting in a position 2 frets down from where I've been speaking during the most of this DVD. So here we go. This track's a shuffle. It's a nice up-tempo, bright kind of thing that Freddie King might write an instrumental around. Again, I'll be using all the techniques we've spoken about, targeting notes, hammer-ons, pull-offs, all the things, bending, vibrato, all those usual things, but in a slightly more up-tempo format. This is in the key of A, which is the key that the majority of the DVD has been in, so you'll recognize some of these shapes, and hope you enjoy this one. This final track's a lovely minor blues. It's in E minor. Again, I'll be showing the notes that we talked about. Again, bending, vibrato. I might even change pickup tone to show how that can affect the dynamics of a track. So here we go, nice, slow, sad minor blues in E.